اهدنا الصراط المستقيم
يود الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب ولا المشركين أن ينزل عليكم من خير من ربكم والله يختص برحمته من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We're starting today with ayah number 105, but before we do, there are a few things I wanted to add. I felt like I was a little bit rushed towards the end of last session, and there are some things I wanted to say about the ayah of magic. وَاتَّبَعُوا مَا تَتْلُو الشَّيَاطِينُ عَلَى مُلْكِ سُلَيْمَانَ. That's ayah number 102. That I should have mentioned and I failed to, so I feel like I should. One of the scholars that I like to read, and I'm impressed with some of his thought. In some areas, it's controversial. In other areas, is actually quite impressive, is the late Amin Ahsan Islahi, rahimahullah, who wrote a 9-volume tafsir in the Urdu language, dedicated to the coherence of the Quran. That was one of its primary objectives, is to illustrate the coherence of the Quran. Those of you that have access to English literature, the first volume of that has been translated. It's called Pondering Over the Quran. That just covers the coherence of Surah Al-Baqarah. Anyway, he was a student of another scholar, Hamiduddin Farahi. And a long story short, both of these scholars were remarkable in their right because they focused quite a bit on the language of the Quran and how the ancient usage of Arabic. And at the same time, they had certain strange opinions as well. And one of the strange opinions of Professor Amin Ahsan Islahi, even though I respect it, that's not the mainstream position, is that he would not take a hadith into account, or the opinions of Sahaba into account in tafsir, unless they were like extremely mutawatir. They were coming from multiple sources, and they were like, muttafaqun alayh, for example, they at least have to be in both Muslim and Bukhari, then he'll consider them as part of his explanation of the Quran, otherwise he won't consider them. Outside of that, there are many, many, many benefits of his tafsir. Outside of that. So sometimes he has very harsh opinions on certain things, and he was very direct and like abrupt in his refutation of popular opinions about certain ayat. But overall, we make dua for our ulama, and where we disagree with them, Allahu A'lam, may Allah Azza wa Jal forgive their sincere mistakes and reward them for the great that they've done. Overall, the contribution he made and his teacher made also to the study of Quran's coherence is actually very powerful, is very beneficial. And one of the things I wanted to share with you is his reflections on the ayah about magic and contrasting magic with what the angels learned. Because there is no explicit text in Islamic literature that really outlines them in their opinions. We read وَاتَّبَعُوا مَا تَتْلُو الشَّيَاطِينُ عَلَى مُلْكِ سُلَيْمَانَ وَمَا كَفَرَ سُلَيْمَانُ وَلَكِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ كَفَرُوا يُعَلِّمُونَ النَّاسَ السِّحْرَ. Now, I'll present his point of view a little bit, okay? And they followed whatever the devils used to follow or read on. لَمَا تَتْلُو الشَّيَاطِينُ عَلَى مُلْكِ سُلَيْمَانَ implies عَلَى عَهْدِ مُلْكِ سُلَيْمَانَ, in the era of the dominion or the kingdom of Sulaiman. وَمَا كَفَرَ سُلَيْمَانَ. Sulaiman did not commit an act of disbelief at all. This was mentioned because the Israelites were practicing different forms of magic, and they used to attribute that magic to Sulaiman alayhi salam. And so Allah comes and basically declares the innocence of Sulaiman alayhi salam, saying, مَا كَفَرَ سُلَيْمَانُ. It's a refutation. Sulaiman did not commit an act of disbelief at all. وَلَكِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ كَفَرُوا. However, in fact, it's the devils, they disbelieved. And that form of language, الشَّيَاطِينَ كَفَرُوا, لَكِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ كَفَرُوا, the Jumla Ismiya form, it implies you're negating somebody else. In other words, the devils, in fact, they disbelieved. In parentheses, not Sulaiman. You've got it wrong. He didn't do any such thing. And then the next part is what's called ataf bayan, or it's bayan. It clarifies how did they commit an act of disbelief. يُعَلِّمُونَ النَّاسَ السِّحْرَ. They used to teach people magic. Now, Allah adds after that, وَمَا أُنزِلَ عَلَى الْمَلَكَيْنِ بِبَابِلَ هَارُوتَ وَمَارُوتَ, and what was sent down upon Babil, in the region of Babil, upon Harut and Marut, the two angels. There's no disagreement that Harut and Marut were angels. Most are also in agreement that they taught in the form of human beings. In other words, that's how they appeared to the people and would teach them. But that ma I talked to you last time about, that ma could be an explanation, or could be, that is to say they taught what the angels what was sent down to the angels. He argues when Allah mentions something that is sent down, it's never, ever, ever in Islamic discourse, it's never associated with something directly evil. When Allah says something was sent down, it's not associated with something in and of itself evil. It may be a trial, it may even be a punishment, like a nation is destroyed and the punishment is sent down from the sky. But even that in and of itself is a form of goodness. Why? Because after that the earth is cleansed. It's a cleansing of sin. It's a cleansing of a nation, right? So even then there's goodness in it. But since Allah Himself describes sihr clearly as kufr, and clearly as something inherently evil in and of itself, He has a hard time reconciling that by saying it is something Allah Himself sent down. The question then arises, what is it that was sent down upon the angels? And he tries to address that question. And I found his answer actually quite fascinating. I don't claim to have absolute conviction in his answer, but I do think it deserves some thought, and it deserves some discussion from scholars. And that is that he argues that, when people become distant from the revelation, from the book itself, like in our case it's the Quran, in their case it was the Torah, when people become distant from it, then what happens is they start finding the solutions to their problems in other places. And it's interesting that Allah mentioned Babel. Babel is Iraq. At the time when the Jews basically had to migrate to Babel because they were kicked out of Israel. And they were basically, and a lot of them were taken out as prisoners into Babylon. And Iraq at the time was known for magic. It was actually known for a lot of spell casting and wizardry, and this kind of stuff was commonplace there. And now Bani Israel are there. And Allah is arguing that in the previous ayah, that they were kind of already disregarding their own book. They had a loose relationship with their own text. So when you have a loose relationship with the book that is supposed to solve your problems, that's what guidance is, it solves your problems, then you start looking for solutions elsewhere, and the solutions elsewhere were what the shayateen were up to, what they were teaching the people, these different kinds of magic. Now, in our tradition, in Islam also, we do believe that magic exists. We do believe that somebody can be spellbound and, jinn and all these kinds of amaliyat that are from the shayateen. They can happen. And the solution to that we find in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is a ruqya. In other words, revelation is given, special revelation. There were some surahs the Prophet was told to recite in certain cases. People who study, jinn possession and all this kind of stuff, I'm not into that stuff and I'm kind of terrified of the subject, but those who are, those who actually seriously at a scholarly level study that subject, there are certain ayat, certain surahs that even though generally Quran itself is ruqya, but there are certain ones that we found in the practice of the Prophet ﷺ, so they're used. So Islahi argues that perhaps what Allah gave them were certain things to combat the kinds of magic that was happening. In other words, it was a form of revelation. It was a form of, a good du'as or adhkar and things like that would be used as ruqya, as cure. But the problem is when people are corrupted and they don't understand the benefits of revelation itself, the revelation has primary benefits and secondary benefits. And that's a very important concept in our religion. Primary and secondary benefits. The primary purpose and benefit of religion is it's there to guide us. It's there to lead our lives a certain way. It's supposed to show the way for how we should, distinguish between right and wrong. The secondary benefits of revelation is it blesses our lives. It protects us. You will recite the dua of travel before you, and it'll be, part of revelation. You're going to, bless the entering of your home. You're going to recite a dua and enter your home. You're going to recite the Quran if you're sick, and it's going to be a form of ruqya and a healing for you also, right? The Quran, and every letter you recite is going to be 10 good deeds. All of these things are additional benefits of revelation. But that is not, these are not the purposes of revelation. These are added benefits. The purpose of revelation is to guide, is to teach us the way that we're supposed to live. Now what happens when people lose touch with the primary function of revelation, which is what again? To guide. When they lose touch with that, then all that's left is benefits. Then the only relationship they have with the revelation is it's going to provide me some kind of benefits. And before we talk about Bani Israel, let's look a little closer to home. Let's look at the Muslim Ummah. And I'm not talking about sunnah and bid'ah and all this kind of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a certain psychological state where many, many, many Muslims, arguably perhaps even a majority chunk of the Muslim population, is very distant from the Quran. But when they do come to the Quran, is when they need certain benefits. Somebody passed away, we need to send them blessings. So we should recite some Quran. That's when we're going to pick up the Quran. Or there's a wedding happening, but so in order to bless the gathering, we should recite some Quran and it'll bless the gathering. Oh, it's Ramadan season, and I've been up to pretty much a lot of no good. I should recite some extra Quran, and I'll get some blessings, and my sins will be forgiven. In other words, the approach to the Quran primarily isn't for guidance itself, it is for these extra benefits. Now, if people are committed to guidance, if people are in fact committed to guidance, does the Quran offer protection? Does the Quran offer blessings for gatherings? Does the Quran offer healing and cure? Absolutely it does. But when that primary benefit has been robbed from people, when they no longer accept that or acknowledge that it's not in the forefront of their thinking process, then all of these things can become actually a curse. And it's very easy to now misuse these kinds of things. So it's no surprise you're going to find people selling cups with Ayatul Kursi or Surah Yasin inscribed on the inside, and they're selling these and telling you, listen, you drink Pepsi in this and you're never going to cough again. Or wear this amulet, it's going to have ayat written out and tied up, and just wear that around your neck, and that's it. You don't need a bulletproof vest after that. It's like your super protection shield, etc. You could argue, where did you get this from? This is not authentic Islam, etc., etc., etc. But the more important thing is, what kind of thought process led to that stuff? Why would people be interested in that to begin with? It is because of these, side benefits. And then the other thing that's crazily, this is happening. When I was reading what the Israelites used to do, I was like, man, I might as well be reading what they do in Pakistan and India, and in Bangladesh and in Turkey, because it's crazy. It's the same thing, and in Algeria and in Syria and in Egypt. You know what they used to do? They used to take this revelation and they used to take bits and pieces of it and make their own kind of spells with it, and say, if you recite this many times, those two will get divorced. Those two are going to, he'll fall in love with me and he'll divorce his wife and he'll marry me. Or she's going to go crazy, or this is like weird stuff. But they wouldn't come up with like magic spells for that. You know what they would use? Revelation itself. I've seen this kind of stuff. Like they'll take an ayah from here, bit of an ayah from there, bit of an ayah from there, and tell you, read this 300 times. And after that, you see what happens. Whoever you're giving you a hard time, they'll be dead. They'll be in a car accident, they'll die, this and that. Crazy stuff like this. Using revelation for it. Now, مَا أُنزِلَ عَلَى الْمَلَكَيْنِ بِبَابِلْ هَارُوتَ وَمَارُوتَ. Whatever was sent down upon Babel, whatever was sent down. Ma, Allah made it ambiguous, what it is that was sent down. Because the word ma alludes to some kind of ambiguity. By the way, interestingly, the word alladhi, which is an ism mawsul, and ma is an ism mawsul, they're both ism mawsuls, but ma is more ambiguous than alladhi. And we'll see that throughout the Quran. When something is more clear, then alladhi is used. When something is more ambiguous, then in its place, the word ma is used. Anyhow, what did the angels say when magic was being taught? When people would come and learn whatever it is that they were learning, it's not magic, we don't know. It was maybe some kind of ruqya that they're learning. What did they say? They said, إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ فِتْنَةٌ. We're nothing but a fitna. This education, and they themselves are described as a fitna. Now fitna is an interesting word in Arabic, and the way it's used in the Quran is even more interesting. I told you something about fitna last time, that it's like, testing gold. When you purify gold, you put it through a tough test, you heat it, you melt it, and the impurities basically burn off. Fitna in the Quran is used for something that can be used, in and of itself isn't evil, but if misused, will lead to evil. Mal, innama amwalukum wa awladukum fitna. Allah says your monies and your children are fitna. Now money in and of itself is not evil. Children in and of itself are not evil. But misuse of money, misuse of children will absolutely lead to evil. So when they said fitna, inconsistent with the meanings of the Quran, what they are teaching in and of itself may not be evil, but has the potential of being used for evil. It can be misused, right? And so, إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ فِتْنَةٌ فَلَا تَكْفُرْ. And if you do misuse it, what will that constitute? Kufr. That same revelation that was being given to you to combat magic, or to come towards guidance, to protect yourself, you're using it to further your own causes, and you're manipulating it, this is kufr. And so the next part, فَيَتَعَلَّمُونَ مَا يَضُرُّهُمْ مِنْهُمَا مَا يَضُرُّهُمْ وَلَا يَنْفَعُهُمْ وَيَتَعَلَّمُونَ مَا يَضُرُّهُمْ وَلَا يَنْفَعُهُم. And they learned, or they continuously learned what harmed them or what didn't benefit them, perhaps is an indication of their mindset. Their intentions were false. And when your intentions are false, even if you learn something good, it's only going to harm you, and it won't benefit you. And that's a very powerful reminder in our religion. Allah even told us this about the Quran itself. يُضِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا وَيَهْدِي بِهِ كَثِيرًا وَمَا يُضِلُّ بِهِ إِلَّا الْفَاسِقِينَ. He misleads with it many people. And he guides with it many people. And he doesn't misguide any except the inherently corrupt. Somebody comes to the Quran for corrupt intentions, and the Quran will harm them. If they come to the Quran with corrupt intentions, and they won't benefit them. It's all about their attitude. وَلَبِئْسَ مَا شَرَوْا بِهِ أَنفُسَهُمْ لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. So that's the one thing I wanted to kind of reiterate. An interesting thought by the late Amin Ahsan Islahi rahimahullah. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. So we'll come back to ayah number 105. Now, Allah has exposed what they, the kinds of no good and the kinds of misuse and abuse of revelation that the Israelites had been up to. Things that were not really known out in the public. These are things that were kind of buried away in their history. Mostly what people heard about them was their glorious past. A nation, especially the nation that's fallen into corruption, loves talking about its glorious past. And so all that people heard ever about the Israelites was their glorious past. Sound familiar? When a nation is engrossed in corruption, all they like to talk about is their glorious past, right? So now Allah exposes their really dirty laundry and lets it all hang out. All of it is exposed at this point. And so they are really, really angry. And one of the things that makes them really angry is that this status that they enjoy, that they're the people that get God's special gift, revelation itself, this status should not be stripped from us. And now they see it being stripped slowly but surely. It's being stripped from them because now they're being exposed as the unqualified, the unworthy, who were given a really good shot. They were given an awesome opportunity after opportunity, but they failed it. So they see it coming. They see the clouds forming, the storm's on its way. We're going to be, this status is going to be removed from us. So with that in mind, read مَا يَوَدُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ وَلَا الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Those who disbelieve from out of the people of the book. Interesting language. Those who disbelieve from out of the people of the book. Allah is not saying the people of the book are disbelievers. He's saying there are those who disbelieve within them. It's a very interesting distinction. We use the word kuffar for just generally all non-Muslims, right? It's not fair actually from the Quran's point of view. The Quranic language is very precise. Basically, the people of the book that came into contact with the Prophet ﷺ were exposed to the truth of Islam and internally realized it too, and still refused to reject it, are الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. Those who disbelieve from out of the people of the book. Because there are people of the book who haven't yet come into contact with the Prophet ﷺ. Allah is not calling them kuffar yet. Kafir is a very loaded term in the Quran. Allah says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَأَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Those who've disbelieved, who've done the act of kufr, they're a hopeless case. So kufr is not a light term. It's not just non-Muslim. Doesn't mean all non-Muslims are a hopeless case. But those who've committed this act of kufr from among the people of the book would never want. مَا يَوَدُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ وَلَا الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Nor will the people that have committed shirk. Here the word shirk is referring to وَلَا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. It's a continuation from the previous. Nor those who have committed the act of disbelief from among the people who do shirk, meaning the Meccans. Allah is highlighting two kinds of people now. There are a group within the Madani community that is absolutely bent upon disbelief, and he's making the same comment about people who do shirk in Mecca. There are a group among them, a sizable group among them, who are absolutely bent upon disbelief. Before I go on, another myth needs to be shattered. We say that the Prophet made da'wah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for over a decade in Mecca, and then he left. And at that point, I told you basically the Meccans are a hopeless case. That's not true for the entire population. Even if he was there for 10, 11, 12 years, it doesn't mean that the entire population of Mecca was exposed to the message. It doesn't mean that. It means a good, sizable community was, in fact, exposed to the message. You know how we know that for sure? Because at the end of the day, even when Mecca is conquered, Allah says, وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ اسْتَجَارَكَ فَأَجِرْهُ حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ. Even at that point, if one of the mushriks, the idol worshippers, if one of them comes to you asking for your time, saying, I never got to hear the message, I was kind of hanging out doing my own thing. I know you were up to something, but I didn't bother ever, so it's not my fault. So now that you guys are on top of us, can I at least see what your religion is? I don't want to convert just for no reason. I want to check out what it is. At that point, the Muslims are not to say, well, where were you? We've been around for 20 years. A little late now. That's not the case. Allah said, فَأَجِرْهُ. Then give him time. حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ. Until he gets to hear Allah's speech. ثُمَّ أَبْلِغْهُ مَأْمَنًا. Then get him to a place where he feels totally safe, not pressured by Muslims. In other words, after Makkah is conquered, after all is said and done, battles have happened, multiple clashes have happened between Meccans and the Muslims. Even then, there's a possibility might be someone who was completely oblivious to all of it. Like some of you who have a PS3 at home or something, oblivious to what's happening in the world around you. And at that point, eventually you wake up and you come, and then even then Allah says, fine, let him listen to it, take him to a safe place so he doesn't feel like if I don't convert to Islam, then Muslims are going to kill me. No, get him to a safe place so he can make up his own mind. ثُمَّ أَبْلِغْهُ مَأْمَنًا ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. That's because they're a nation that has no idea. They're oblivious. So that's why I'm understanding this. الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ وَلَا الْمُشْرِكِينَ وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَلَا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. That الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا is implied here. أَنْ يُنَزَّلَ عَلَيْكُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ مِّن رَبِّكُم. That any good should be revealed. Any good whatsoever should be sent down upon you from your master. وَاللَّهُ يَخْتَصُّ بِرَحْمَتِهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. So they couldn't stand that good was coming. This revelation was coming. It was exposing the evils of the mushrikun first, and it called them out, very explicitly in Makkah. And now this revelation is calling out the Yahud in Medina. It's calling them out, and it's exposing its own goodness. Allah is boasting of the goodness and the perfection of the Quran. You can't stand it. And what we learn from that also is the Quran was very, very, very unapologetic. It just offended criminals. It wasn't just there to tell the truth, it was there to offend criminals. And it offended criminals on either side, whether we're in Makkah or Medina. أَنْ يُنَزَّلَ عَلَيْكُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ مِّن رَبِّكُم وَاللَّهُ يَخْتَصُّ بِرَحْمَتِهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. And Allah specifically chooses, ikhtisas, to choose someone exclusively, to make someone exclusive. Who felt that they were exclusive? In one sense, the mushrikun felt they were exclusive, they were custodians of Ibrahim's house. In another sense, the Israelites felt exclusive because they are the chosen nation. And Allah says, Allah makes exclusive whoever He wants by His special mercy. That's not something you earn. That's not something that you deserve. It's not something you're entitled to. It comes especially and exclusively by His mercy. And whoever He wants gets that special selection. وَاللَّهُ ذُو الْفَضْلِ الْعَظِيمِ. And that Allah is the owner of the ultimate favor. You remember this discussion with Bani Israel began, أَنِّي فَضَّلْتُكُمْ. I gave you the ultimate favor. I preferred you. Allah says Allah possesses the ultimate preference. In other words, He owns the right to give preference to whoever He wants. He's Dhu. Dhu is for possession. Then another question came from the Israelites. And that question was, well, if this is really revelation, then it should be exactly the same as what we were given. I mean, we have certain laws. They had a Sharia. They had an entire law, legal principles in the Torah that were revealed. And the Quran's legal principles differ. And they haven't even seen the real differences yet. This is before the changing of the Qibla and all of the other stuff that's really remarkably different from Judaism or the Islam that was given to Musa alayhi salam. But they started arguing, if this is real revelation, how come it's different? The rulings are different and the instructions are different than what we have. How come it's not exactly the same? Now Allah says, مَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ. So this was the first response to them. We would not nullify any ayah whatsoever, any piece of revelation. Ayah here implying any miraculous sign, any piece of revelation, be it from the Quran, be it from the Torah, be it from the Injil, be it from the Suhuf of Ibrahim, any whatsoever. We wouldn't, the term uses abrogation. I'm sure some of you have heard that before. Abrogated verses, right? Nansakh, to cancel out, to nullify. We wouldn't nullify any ayah whatsoever. Min ayatin, min of ta'ajjub here. Any ayah whatsoever. And notice, those of you that know a little bit of Arabic, nansakh has a sukoon on it. Ma nansakh, it's majzoom. Like I teach, it's the lightest form. But there's nothing before it that makes it lightest. This is actually a special form. It creates the hypothetical situation. We wouldn't at all. We wouldn't ever. Not we don't, we wouldn't ever abrogate or cancel out any ayah at all, or nunsiha, or make it forgotten. There are two ways that naskh happens. Removal of revelation happens, and this is historical also. One, that it's, Allah Azza wa Jal will reveal something more else. We'll talk about that in a second. Or He'll make it forgotten. And the historical way that happened was, Musa alayhi salam or Nuh alayhi salam was given revelation. We don't know what it was though. We know some conversations he had with his people because Quran recorded it. But the exact revelation he was given, we don't know. Allah makes mention of Suhuf Ibrahim, the scriptures of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Suhuf Ibrahim wa Musa. What were the scriptures given to Ibrahim alayhi salam? The Prophet told us bits and pieces of them, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Some of the wisdoms that were taught to Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Prophet told us this is what was given to Ibrahim alayhi salam. This is from the Suhuf, but the entire Suhuf we don't know. Much of it is essentially forgotten. It's forgotten. It wasn't passed down properly enough, so it got forgotten. So now, this is Nunsiha. Now, when it comes to previous revelations, Tawrat, Injil, and then Zabur, and then finally Quran, each revelation is actually part of, I know it's a dangerous and loaded term, but it's part of the evolution of human society. Not human beings, biologically, but human society. You know, when a child is in first grade, you give them certain kinds of lessons. And when they're in second grade, the lessons evolve. And when they're third grade, the lessons evolve even more. Humanity itself was going through a growing process. Society was becoming more and more, increasingly more and more complex. So at first, Allah gave certain kinds of instructions. When humanity reached a certain point of maturity, then Allah gave them serious law. Musa alayhi salam, laws were given. This is the first sharia really that was given to Musa alayhi salam. Fighting was prescribed, establishment of law was prescribed, punitive punishments were prescribed. All this sort of stuff is, original to Mosaic law, Musa alayhi salam. Before that, interestingly enough, if you look at what the Prophet, what Quran tells us about what the Prophets were taught, as far as rights and wrongs, you could basically reduce them to moral principles. Goodness to parents, honesty in business, kindness, humility, etc. These are general principles. But then laws, very particular laws, started getting revealed. That's more advanced. That's like a constitution for a society. And then society evolves even more, and then more is revealed. And then what happens in the case of the Israelites is they have law, they're given law, but they lost the spiritual and the heart, the spirit that drives that law. And so Isa alayhi salam didn't come to replace the law, but he came to put the heart back in it. Imagine prayer is a part of Islamic law. We have to pray. But isn't it a spiritual exercise? So if the only thing that remains is the fiqh of wudu, and the fiqh of praying in the proper direction, and the fiqh of clean clothing, and the fiqh of what to recite, and when to recite it, and the angle at which your ruku' should be, and where your hands should be when you make sajda, and whether your fingers should go up once or multiple times, and which way should you say salam first, and which way should you say salam second. All the technicalities of prayer would remain, imagine, and none of its heart would remain. None of the whole point of it, which is to connect to Allah, would be gone, and all that would remain would be a concern for the technical aspects, right? Even though the technical aspects are important, one cannot, people to go on two extremes, right? Some say, well, the salat is just cardiovascular exercise. I can connect to God myself much better. I'm just going to sit on the side of my bed, hold my hands like this and kneel and just pray to God in my own way. That way I can connect to God. Others will say, no, you have to have your salat perfect in this way, and then there will be no emphasis on khushu' at all. There's two extremes. The Israelites had reached one extreme. So they had to be brought back to balance, and that was the message of Isa alayhi salam, essentially a spiritual message. He doesn't bring new laws. He doesn't bring new laws. He keeps saying, مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيَّ مِنَ التَّوْرَاتِ. I came to confirm what's already in the Torah. But there was a deterioration happened, so Allah revealed more to now reconfirm the original teachings and the parts of it that were lost, that were forgotten, that people forgot. Now, finally, humanity reached a point in their evolution that Allah chose to reveal the final message, this book. This book is supposed to be a guideline not just for the Arabs but for all of humanity. And so there were some things in the previous revelation that were of limited relevance. They were relevant for that society, for that time. But now that Allah sent the final revelation, some of those things were abrogated, and mostly what was abrogated were things that were harder on us, and Allah actually made them easier. The entire day of the Sabbath, we were forbidden from doing anything, the Muslims of that time. I don't call them Jews, I call them Muslims of that time. Followers of Musa alayhi salam. They were to observe the day of the Sabbath. Then Allah Azza wa Jal made ease for this ummah and for all believers to come from whatever nation, ethnicity they come from. It's just the day of Friday and it's just at the time of prayer. And ease was created. Then there were certain things they made haram on themselves over time. Like Yaqub alayhi salam didn't like eating camel meat. Yaqub alayhi salam's other name is Israel. He didn't like eating camel meat, right? So what did they do over time? Well, it became haram. And then Allah says, Allah reveals in Quran, no, it wasn't this case. It wasn't that it was haram on Israel. كل الطعام حل لبني إسرائيل إلا ما حرم إسرائيل على نفسه من قبل أن تنزل التوراة. All kinds of food was halal on Bani Israel. Except for what Israel didn't like himself, he made it haram on himself. He's like, I can't stand camel meat. And some of you have that. You don't say it's haram on you, but this is the kind of language, right? I can't do it. Like for me, coffee is haram. Not that it's religiously forbidden. I just don't like it. I'm never going to drink it. It's a demeanor. قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِالتَّوْرَةِ. And he says he had that preference way before Tawrat even came. But they included that in their law. So Allah says later on, فَأْتُوا بِالتَّوْرَةِ فَاتْلُوهَا إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Bring Tawrat and read it. Show me where it is. So what Quran did was it confirmed the valid laws, made eases, made concessions in some places, and completed what humanity wasn't yet ready for. So this is Allah explaining why nasakh happens. One more important issue, I know I'm taking time on this ayah, but it's important. Some of these issues are at least a cursory conversation and a brief survey conversation needs to be had about them. Then there's the concept of nasakh within the Quran. Some ayat were revealed and later on Allah revealed other ayat that cancelled out the ruling of the previous ayat. Okay? So there's a concept of other, parts of Quran nullifying other parts of the Quran. We should be very, very, very careful. The first disclaimer I'll say, we should be extremely careful when we talk about this subject. We're dealing with Allah's words. We're dealing with final revelation. So for a human being to dare say, this part of revelation is no longer applicable, it is cancelled out. Its validity, its guidance is cancelled out because of that part of revelation. Before we say that, we should think 1,000 times. Why? Because we are in the end dealing with not just any kind of word, we're dealing with Allah's word. And to say some part of Allah's word is no longer applicable is a very heavy, tall claim to make. So one has to exhaust their efforts trying to find a reason for which this ayah is not abrogated before they say it is abrogated. You understand what I'm saying? Interestingly, in our times, this ayah, this concept of nasakh is being taken like very loosely, extremely loosely. There are some groups, for instance, who say, you know what, all Muslims should just fight. Just pick up arms and kill whoever you can. Why? Because Allah says qital. The last surah revealed, or the last surahs revealed were about fighting. Which means all the Quran that talks about patience and dawah and discourse and tolerance, etc., all of that is basically what the term they use is mansukh. All of that is mansukh, all of that is abrogated because the final revelations, or towards the end of Quran, there's this intolerant kind of punishment attitude towards the Makkahs. We'll see that clearly in Surah At-Tawbah, that discussion, right? But you know what you're doing then? 2/3 of Quran is dawah, Meccan Quran. A huge chunk of Quran, Madani Quran, is a conversation with the people of the book. Just a conversation, a dialogue with them. All of that's violated. Because you can't talk to someone and fight with them at the same time, right? You know that, right? You can't invite someone. Dawah literally means what? Inviting someone. You can't invite someone and fight with them at the same time. It doesn't happen. You just shout at them and like, hey, come over to dinner tomorrow night. It doesn't work. You can either fight with a nation or you can talk to a nation. You can't have both. So when this kind of really shallow and really extreme and really unfair view, it's not even unfair because it's like a misinterpretation. You're talking about Allah's words being inapplicable? Oh, this ayah is mansukh. Wait, you can't just say that. You can't just say that. So I want to share with you just some things about how the approach of our classical scholars to this subject, not just in what they said, but their attitude. People like Shah Waliullah Dahalbi rahimahullah. Originally Imam al-Alusi said there are 17 ayat that are mansukh, or 21 or something like that. 17, 21 ayat are abrogated in the Quran, meaning other ayat came and they changed the rulings in them. Other scholars came and said, no, there are only 11. Other scholars came, there's only 8. Shah Waliullah Dahalbi exhausted efforts saying, I think there are only 4. The other ones can be explained away. Like the constant efforts were to say, we shouldn't say that the ayat are mansukh. Allah left the subject open. So to close it like that would be an unfair thing to do. So interesting, to just give you some examples, alcohol for instance. First revelations about alcohol are in this surah. Allah says, إِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِن نَفْعِهِمَا. Most common mistranslation of all time. Like the most epic example of mistranslation. They say the harm in them is greater than benefit. Ever heard that before? The harms in alcohol and gambling are greater than their benefit. The most incredible example of mistranslation. Allah didn't say ضَرُّهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِن نَفْعِهِمَا. He said إِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِن نَفْعِهِمَا. Ithm means sin, not harm. Allah said their sin is greater than their benefit. Not their harm is greater than their benefit. And people look at harm and say, oh, look, it's not that harmful. Look, we could find out that there has benefits too, and they start getting into that conversation. Anyway, first revelation was that sin is more than its benefit. Even then, fine, there's sin in it, but you could argue, okay, at least Allah says there's some benefit. Fine. Then the next revelation came, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى حَتَّى تَعْلَمُوا مَا تَقُولُونَ. Don't come near the prayer while you're drunk until you know what you're talking about. That was the next phase. Does that phase necessarily nullify the fact that the harm is greater than the benefit? Or the sin is greater than the benefit? No. It's a further elaboration. You don't necessarily have to look at that as it violated the previous or it nullified the previous injunction. It's actually, you could look at it as a clarification of the previous injunction, as a further elaboration and a continuation of the same conversation. You know, you're counseling someone, you can't go 0 to 100 immediately. You give them a little. When you see them ready, you get a little tougher. You see them ready, you get a little tougher. You go progressively tougher. That doesn't mean the previous instructions don't count. It means that you are getting them ready for the serious instruction. And by the way, how many times do Muslims pray? 5? That's the minimum for the Sahaba. You think they only pray 5 times? They pray a lot more than that. They have every opportunity to find they pray. So even if you don't think of it that way, between each prayers you have a couple of hours. If you get drunk in between, are you going to be drunk for the next prayer? Yeah. Allah says don't be drunk in your prayers. So basically he cut down their alcohol. If they're committed to prayer, they can't get drunk. Because it happens every few hours and they pray even more than that. They pray even more than that. Then eventually the ayat came, رِجْسٌ مِّنْ عَمَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ. He didn't say that in the beginning, he just said it's sinful. But then Allah told us something it had always been. It is an abomination from the work of the devil. Stay away from it. هَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ? Are you going to stay away or what? Literally that kind of language. هَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ? Right? This is final no. We don't argue that the previous ayah about don't go near the prayer while you're drunk. I don't see that as abrogated. I see it as furthered. It's furthered. That's all. The same thing's going to happen in inheritance law. Surah Al-Baqarah will talk about inheritance law. It's going to give us some generals. You should leave good for your parents and close relatives. All it says is taraka khayran. You should leave good stuff. Leave something good for your parents as a will. Okay? Surah Al-Nisa will come along and give you a 4th here, a 6th here, an 8th here, a 3rd there, this, if you have children, if you don't have children, if you're married, if you're divorced, if you have parents alive, if you have no brothers, no sisters, no parents, no children, then what should you do? All that stuff will be clarified. But the brief version of it, not the abrogated version, the brief version of it is, you should leave something good. It's an elaboration, not a cancellation. That's not a healthy way of looking at it, you know. So this is the concept of an-nasakh. You know, there are very few scholars who believe there is no nasakh in the Quran, but even the ones that do, they look at nasakh in a different way than we do. They don't look at it as this ayah has no longer any benefits. They just look at it as the final version of that law was revealed later. It was progressively revealed until the final version came. So there's abrogation, or this cancellation happens from previous revelation to new. Quran abrogates Tawrat, and within the Quran also it can be argued. نَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ مِّنْهَا وَمِثْلِهَا. Either we bring something better than it, or the likes of it. Now the question is, if it's just like it, then why bring it again? Because it was forgotten. If it was valuable and people lost it, it should be brought back again. So either Allah will bring something better, or Allah will bring something just like it. أَلَمْ تَعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Don't you know that Allah, didn't you already know that Allah is in complete control over everything, all things whatsoever? You don't think that, you know, because someone will say, why would Allah do that? How come? Why is that necessary? Allah could have made it that it doesn't get lost. Allah says, I already know that I'm in complete control. This is part of my wisdom. أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ أَلَمْ تَعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Didn't you already know? Didn't you know that Allah alone exclusively owns the kingdom of the skies and the earth? وَمَا لَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ مِنْ وَلِيٍّ وَلَا نَصِيرٍ. And you're not going to be finding anyone other than Allah at all. No kind of protective friend, no kind of aid. أَمْ تُرِيدُونَ أَن تَسْأَلُوا رَسُولَكُمْ. Are you intending to question your messenger? كَمَا سُئِلَ مُوسَى مِن قَبْلُ. The way Musa was questioned much before. The Muslims are being asked a question now. And even the Bani Israel are being asked, this is your messenger too, Rasulakum. Because they refuse to say he's our messenger. Oh, he's the messenger of the Arabs. He's not our messenger. Allah put it as Rasulakum, he is your messenger. And are you questioning him just like you questioned Musa much before? It raises an interesting point. Asking questions. Is it wrong to ask the Prophet questions? We learned previously that the Sahaba were reluctant to ask the Prophet questions. But it really matters what kind of question. There's a question asked to get further elaboration. Then there is, asking someone and questioning someone is two different things, right? Questioning someone. When Musa alayhi salam says, go slaughter a cow, say, are you kidding? You think we're a joke? That's also a question, but it's questioning the validity of what he's saying. Questioning the integrity of the message. We are allowed to ask questions about our religion. We shouldn't question it. We shouldn't question its integrity. Oh, this doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense. That attitude in and of itself shows that you don't really believe. If one believes this is in fact revelation, this is in fact the messenger of Allah, there's no room for them to question its validity. And the fact that they do ask those kinds of questions shows that faith isn't yet there. And that explains the rest of this ayah. وَمَنْ يَتَبَدَّلِ الْكُفْرَ بِالْإِيمَانِ. Whoever would replace disbelief with faith. Those questions are an indication of a lack of faith. It's disbelief. فَقَدْ ضَلَّ سَوَاءَ السَّبِيلِ. Then he has lost the most even path. Sawa' as-sabil is an idafa for grammar students, but it actually produces a mawsuf sifa meaning. We'll study that in advanced grammar one day. Okay? The most even possible path, the straightest path, meaning the path of Islam, the word dalla is used. He's lost it. Quran has two expressions, dalla an sawa' as-sabil and dalla sawa' as-sabil. There's two expressions. Dalla sawa' as-sabil means, there's a road you need to take and you lost the road itself. In other words, you don't even know there's a road that goes there. You have no idea about the road. Dalla an sawa' as-sabil means you were on the road and you took a wrong turn. And then you got away from the road. And maybe you were trying to get back now. But you've taken a wrong road. Dalla sawa' as-sabil is worse. In other words, you don't even know the road is there. You don't even know if it exists. Dalla sawa' as-sabil. He's lost it entirely. وَدَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. There's a multitude, a huge number from the people of the book. They really, really would love. They have a very strong desire. لَوْ يَرُدُّونَكُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ إِيمَانِكُمْ. If only there was some way they can turn you back, even after you've come to your faith. كُفَّارًا, into disbelievers once again. حَسَدًا مِنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِهِمْ. Out of jealousy that emanates from within themselves. Deep within themselves they have a jealousy, and because of that they would love for you to go back to being disbelievers once again. مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الْحَقِّ. Even after the truth has been clarified to them. When they got exposed as hypocrites and disbelievers, and that they don't really follow their book, then of course you'd hate to stick out like a black sheep. You'd want everybody else to be colored too. Everybody else should be tainted also. So they want you to lose your religion just like they've lost theirs, so they don't feel like they're selling short or they're falling short of their expectations. This is a very common human phenomenon. If you're not studying and you're a lazy bum student, and your fellow student, your roommate is studying hard, there's two options. Maybe I should study hard? Nah. But every time I see him studying, I feel bad. So I should convince him to come to the movie with me. Right? Come on, it's okay, we'll study later. Easing your own guilty conscience. This is, وَدَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ لَوْ يَرُدُّونَكُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ إِيمَانِكُمْ كُفَّارًا حَسَدًا مِنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِهِمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الْحَقِّ. Even after truth became absolutely clear to them. فَعْفُوا. Then the Prophet tells us, or Allah tells the Muslims, just pardon it, forgive it. وَاصْفَحُوا, and turn the page. A page in Arabic is like this right here is waraqa. One side of it is safha. When you say wasfahu, turn the page, you no longer see the back of the page. Right? Isfahu is used in Arabic to say, just ignore it, turn the page, don't dwell on it, don't think about it too much, don't think about what they want. Don't get paranoid. Oh, they're planning against us. They're making websites. They got a radio show coming out. They're going to say stuff about us. They're going to make us lose our faith. Allah says, leave them alone and turn the page. Ignore it. It's all fluff. You don't worry about it. Don't get overwhelmed. You know how Muslims get overwhelmed by the plots of other than Islam? And this same لَوْ يَرُدُّونَكُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ إِيمَانِكُمْ كُفَّارًا, they would really like to turn you away after you have faith back into disbelievers. How many websites dedicated to contradictions in the Quran? or how the Prophet is evil, ma'adallah, or how the Quran is like, barbaric, and how Islam doesn't make any sense, and all this stuff. And Muslims like, there's that website. Oh my God, there's another one, and another one. Ustad Nouman, you should do something about this. Okay, you know what I should do? Fa'afu wasfahu hatta ya'ti Allahu bi amrihi, until Allah comes with His decision. There's a historical context to this conversation also. And that is that, yes, they were plotting and they were trying. Because, people who became Muslim in Medina were people that were either Jews or Christians. They were part of communities before, and they had clergy and they had community before, and they're losing members of their community. They want to get them back. They want to get their own people back. There's a push to attack Islam just to get their own people back because they feel like they lost their own community. Now, Allah is letting us know there are bigger problems to worry about. The clash with the Makkans is around the corner. Badr is about to happen. You got bigger problems. If you start worrying about this stuff, you won't be able to deal with the real problems that are coming. You just ignore this for now. You don't have the resources to deal with problems on the inside and the outside at the same time right now. Just one priority at a time. What we're learning from that in the Quran also is a sense of prioritization. We can have lots of problems, but we have to fry the bigger fish first. Deal with that first and then deal with the other stuff. Don't get sidetracked. Too easy to get sidetracked. So Allah puts the priorities, these awlawiyat, these priorities, He sets them for the Muslims. Fa'fu wasfahu hatta ya'ti Allahu bi amrihi, until Allah comes with His decision. When the believers are like, okay, yeah, you know what, Allah will take care of it. Inna Allaha ala kulli shay'in qadir. No doubt Allah is in complete control over everything. That statement alone should put the believer at ease. Oh, Allah is in control? Okay, then all the plots don't mean anything. I shouldn't worry then. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. If you really want to focus on something, here's what you focus on. Establish salat and give zakat. Concentrate on this. So if you've been concentrating on the wrong thing. وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ. And whatever you have advanced, invested in, تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُم, what you've sent forward for yourselves. That's the common translation, right? But I don't like to translate it like that. I really like to say what you invested for yourselves. Sent forward for yourself implies what you have invested for yourselves in terms of good deeds. Min khayrin, of any good. تَجِدُوهُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. You will find it with Allah. So if there's one thing you should be obsessed with all the time, thinking about all the time, worrying about all the time, should be compiling your good deeds that you're going to find with Allah. That's one thing you should be preoccupied with. Establish salat, give zakat, and those two things will make you think about good deeds anyway. You know why those two things are mentioned all over Quran? They're so awesome how Allah just summarizes all of our religion in two phrases. Aqimus salah and atu zakat. The entire religion is summarized. Aqimus salah is not just about the prayers. It's not just about the prayers, it's being connected with Allah. As-salah also means being connected. Our prayers are a means by which we get connected to Allah. Allah says in this same surah, حَافِظُوا عَلَى الصَّلَوَاتِ وَالصَّلَاةِ الْوُسْطَى. Guard all the prayers and the middle prayer, and also means the time in between the prayers. Once you're connected to Allah at Dhuhr, don't disconnect yourself until Asr. It's a means by which you can maintain a connection with Allah until Asr. That's what the purpose of Dhuhr is, to keep you going until Asr. When you reconnect, refuel in Asr, it's supposed to keep you connected to Allah until Maghrib. That's what the point of it is. And the longest gap we have is which one? Which two prayers? Longest gap? Asha and Fajr. You should be sleeping at that time. It's fine. You won't be distracted by dunya then. Just go to sleep. Except if you wake up and make more qiyam, that's it. But the times that you're going to be awake, you're going to need to be refueled over and over again. It's such wisdom in how the salawat are distributed. And if you're connected to Allah, you'll stay away from sins. On the other hand, on a macro view, zakat happens how many times a year? Once a year. And it's given on your income, right? But giving zakat on impure income is pointless. If you're earning poison to begin with, if you're earning haram to begin with, then what's zakat? What zakat does is, on the one hand, aqimus salah establishes our ibadat. Our relationship with Allah is settled. Atu zakat takes care of our mu'amalat. The way you will earn your money, the way you will spend your money, your finances are going to be clean now. They're going to be clean. So your finances are clean, which means your sources of income are clean. The two primary things. كُلُوا مِمَّا فِي الْأَرْضِ حَلَالًا طَيِّبًا. Consume the halal, good and pure things. They're both summarized in these two very fundamental pillars of our deen. أَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ تَجِدُوهُ عِندَ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. No doubt Allah, especially in regards to what you are up to, He's in full view. He's watching completely what it is that you are up to. This is a very soul-searching ayah. Whatever good you do, you're going to find it. And Allah is watching completely. And when Allah sees something, He sees the inside of it and the outside of it. The intent for which you and I do something, and the output. The output, everybody can see. Everybody can see somebody made salat. Why they made salat, Allah sees too. How much they were connected to Allah, that Allah sees too. Inna Allah bima ta'maluna basir. وَقَالُوا. Then these Jews and Christians, once they heard, okay, fine, this abrogation question has been answered. Now they came to their regular slogan. And this slogan to this day is alive and well. وَقَالُوا لَنْ يَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ. Nobody will go into Jannah, ever. إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ هُودًا أَوْ نَصَارَى. Except someone who had been Jewish or Christian. We've been around. Kana implies here that we've been here. You just came, new kid on the block. I was just listening to NPR the other day. They were talking about the Mormons because the Republican presidential candidates are Mormon, right? A few of them. And they were like, yeah, Judaism and Christianity, original Islam, new cult. Mormonism, new cult. They bunched it with Islam with Mormonism. Just like Muhammad and Quran, just like that, you have their prophet and their own book. It's a cult. Wow, that's awesome. That's this idea of this is new. And we've been there. Where's the word been there? إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ هُودًا أَوْ نَصَارَى. We're the ones that are saved. We're the special ones. تِلْكَ أَمَانِيُّهُمْ. Allah says, those are their wishful thoughts. قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ. Tell them, bring your evidences. إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. If in fact you're truthful. You'll listen, I told you as a hobby I listen to like sermons from the church, right? When it comes to being saved, meeting the Lord, going to paradise, heaven, gates of heaven, very loud. Proofs for it, no conversation. The proof for it is you're raising your voice. That's your proof for it. That's it. You talk to people like that, and you talk to them about evidences, you know what's going to happen? Their voices are going to start getting raised. And voices getting raised are in and of themselves as an indication of there are no evidences. All you have is raised voices. That's all you have. إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ. This is, قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ. Bring your undeniable. Burhan is, by the way, a proof that stumps you. You can't come up with anything after that. If in fact you've been truthful. فَلَا مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ. However, the one who submitted his face before Allah, وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ. And he in fact excels. Excels means, أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. The Prophet describes ihsan, right? That you worship Allah as though you can see Him. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. And if you're not able to see Him, if you can't possibly see Him, then you should at least be aware constantly that He sees you. That would be ihsan. Whoever started with Islam, وَأَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ, he submitted his face to Allah. That's Islam. How far can you go in Islam? All the way to ihsan. So Aslama is the beginning, Muhsin is the end. Man aslama wajhahu lillahi wa huwa muhsinun. Falahu ajruhu 'inda rabbih. Then he will have his compensation exclusively. Notice it's singular. He will have his compensation. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. And there will be no fear on them, nor will they be the ones that are grieving. There's a switch immediately from what? Singular to plural. Immediately. It's a very interesting switch. This is called iltifat. Iltifat means when switches happen in the Quran. This is the iltifat from mufrad to jama', from singular to plural. What is the benefit of this switch? First of all, when you submit before Allah, that is you by yourself. You're not doing it because you're around other people. Ihsan is something entirely personal. It's not a communal thing. Your Islam with Allah, you're submitting your face before Allah. Sajda, the act of sajda itself, is a very, very personal thing. And though community helps us, in the end we're on our own. كُلُّهُمْ آتِيهِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَرْدًا. All of them will come before Allah on Judgment Day alone. When it comes to compensation, your compensation is exclusively for you. فَلَهُ أَجْرُهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِ. He will have his compensation with his master. He'll have it individually. But then when it comes to danger, when it comes to لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ, there's no danger on them. Literally, fear on them implies here danger on them. When there's a danger, what do we like to do? What's natural human inclination? Be around others. Be with those, all those people. They're all over there. I should go there too. I shouldn't be by myself. By myself, I'm in more danger. La khawfun alayhim. Allah will keep them safe as a collectivity, and their collectivity will also make them feel safer. When you're around people who don't have books in their left hand, when you're around people that don't have their foreheads branded, you're going to feel safer on Judgment Day. You have your own compensation, but the fact, you have your book in your right hand, you're still nervous, but you see other people, okay, yeah, these guys are good, okay, all right, it's not that bad here. Okay, calm down, all right. And then you see some familiar face like, oh, you're here too? Okay. Didn't think you'd, well, anyway. All right. So, it's all good. Jannah's big enough, So that'll happen too. And by the way, you will find people in Jannah you don't like, or you didn't used to like. Allah makes mention of that. Like you? Oh God. But Allah removes ghil from your hearts. Allah removes ill feelings from your hearts in Jannah. All those feelings are taken away, surgically removed, because they wouldn't come out otherwise, right? So they're removed in Jannah. So this latter part, la khawfun alayhim wa lahum yahzanun, and they're not going to be the ones that are grieving. Because these two things are exacerbated, they're multiplied when there are more people. Anger, grief, sadness. When two people are crying, the third one starts crying. They don't even know why. Why are you crying? I don't know. They start joining. When sadness, it's infectious. And because it's the negation, it's the opposite mentioned too. A sense of security is also infectious. Joy is also infectious. You can be happy when you're around people that are happy, or even more happy. It just multiplies. That multiple is mentioned. The other thing scholars mention is their reward started with them being compensated individually, but their real compensation is that they're going to have a collectivity of people. They're having lots of people enjoy these blessings of Jannah together. وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ لَيْسَتِ النَّصَارَى عَلَى شَيْءٍ. By the way, they said nobody's entering paradise. Then they contradict themselves. Sometimes when it comes to talking against Muslims, they say Jews and Christians, the only ones going to heaven. Then when they're talking about each other, they say, the Jews say Christians have no basis whatsoever. Jesus is not a prophet, not even a legitimate child, ma'adallah. These are the kinds of things they'll say about Christians. وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ لَيْسَتِ النَّصَارَى عَلَى شَيْءٍ وَقَالَتِ النَّصَارَى لَيْسَتِ الْيَهُودُ عَلَى شَيْءٍ. And the Christians say Jews have no basis whatsoever. They killed Christ. They're criminals. They had the blessings that they didn't benefit from them. وَهُمْ يَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابَ. And interestingly, they're both reading the book. They're both reading the same book. They're reading the same book and coming to very different conclusions about each other. Does that sound familiar at all? One group says, this one has no basis. This one says, that one has no basis. And they're both reading the book. Sound familiar? We should be looking in a mirror when we read this stuff. Like it's a pretty ugly picture. كَذَلِكَ قَالَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ مِثْلَ قَوْلِهِمْ. And that is exactly what, this is just like what those who have no knowledge say, just like them. No, those who have no knowledge, the mushrikun. They say those guys are all wrong. They don't even have any knowledge. They say, those guys have no basis, those guys have no basis. So you got three kinds of people. Two knowledgeable groups that are both reading the book, hating on each other, and there's a third completely ignorant group, and they say everybody's wrong. That also sounds familiar? Oh, these mullahs, these Maulvis, they're all... Even in-house, even within the Muslims, we have this issue. كَذَلِكَ قَالَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ مِثْلَ قَوْلِهِمْ فَاللَّهُ يَحْكُمُ بَيْنَهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. It is Allah, in fact, who will be making judgment between them on the day of resurrection. فِيمَا كَانُوا فِيهِ يَخْتَلِفُونَ. In whatever differences they used to have among each other. Whatever those issues were, all of them will be resolved. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. Now the conversation starts hinting towards what's coming in the surah. I'll take 5 more minutes, I'll give you guys a break. Whoever could be more wrong than someone who forbids the masajid of Allah. Masjid, a place where you do sajda. The first act, the ultimate act of worship before Allah is that of sajda. The ones who forbid the places where sajda to be done to Allah, the masajid of Allah, they stop people from going there. And what do they stop? An yudhkara fiha. That he should be remembered in them. Ismuhu, his name should be remembered in them. وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا. And this person makes efforts in corrupting the masjid. The kafir used to make efforts in corrupting the masjid by putting idols there. And make efforts that the Muslims aren't allowed to pray here. This is سَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا. أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَن يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ. Those are the people, it is not becoming of them to enter these masajid, except in a state of fear. لَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا خِزْيٌ وَلَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. For them, especially in this world, there's humiliation, and in the afterlife they have tremendous punishment. This ayah is actually very deep. It's talking about some very, very serious issues, and it will open up the subject of the rest of Surah Al-Baqarah. So I'll talk about that in a little bit of detail, inshallah ta'ala, after our break. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.